Hello and welcome. I hope you all are doing well. Today we'll be discussing about KYC. So discussions regarding KYC started gaining traction after the amendments introduced to KYC directions in the previous month. Over the last month we have been interacting with several financial institutions to understand their difficulties relating to KYC. So now we have decided to make this video to introduce you all to the general concept of KYC, the framework of KYC in India, and the practical difficulties being faced in the market. So if you are a person who is dealing with KYC of customers day in and day out, or you're sitting at policy making level deciding the policy of your organization, or you're just a curious mind wanting to understand what KYC actually is, this video is for you. In the next 1 minute, I'll run you all through the pointers or the major areas that we are going to discuss in this video. So we'll be starting with a broad description about what KYC is. Thereafter, we'll move on to why is KYC needed. We'll also talk about anti-money laundering framework in India, and I'll also give you a introduction to KYC directions, and then we'll move on to how a credit sanction or an account opening process moves. We'll understand several intricacies of KYC directions, various modes of carrying out KYC, and then we'll also just run past the major compliance requirements under the KYC directions in PMLA Act and rules. If at this stage you think that this video is going to be of interest to you, please continue with me. Thank you for staying. Let us start with understanding what KYC is. KYC stands for Know Your Customer. Basically, it is knowing the person you're going to be dealing with. It is a process of establishing a person's identity. And to put it very, very simply, I would say that KYC is knowing that the person is who he is claiming to be. Now let us talk about why is KYC needed? Why there is so much of discussion around this. So the first and foremost risk that any financial institution can have is the risk of impersonation. What this means is, let's say I am Kanakribha Jithani, but I go to a financial institution, let's say to take a loan, and I claim myself to be Miss XYZ. I take a loan, and in absence of, let's say, the concept of KYC, the lending institution will lend me out a loan. I'll go spend it and run away. They don't know me, they cannot reach me. So they have lost their money. Secondly, there is also a risk of money laundering. Well, where there is money, there is risk. And this risk is very much enhanced in case of financial institutions. Essentially, money laundering means laundering of your money, as the term suggests it. It is cleaning up your money. So when there is some money which is obtained from an illegitimate source, and then you pass it on through layers and layers of clean transactions or legitimate transactions so as to make it look clean, this process is called money laundering. In addition to money laundering, there is also a risk that the financial institution may be funding for some terrorist activity. We don't know what the customer is going to use the loan for. Even though we establish so many layers, we take declarations, we check the end use and everything, there is still a risk that this can be used for financing terrorism. Apart from this, financial institutions are also posed to risk of frauds. These frauds could be conducted by the customers or their own employees or anyone dealing with them. And that is why conducting a KYC is very, very essential. let us understand the anti-money laundering framework of India. Now, why are we discussing about anti-money laundering framework here? The genesis of KYC, the concept of KYC, it comes from the anti-money laundering framework. So the anti-money laundering framework of India is constructed in this way. Firstly, there is a Prevention of Money Laundering Act, which ensures that there is no money laundering activity conducted, or which tries to curb the practices of money laundering in the country. From the Prevention of Money Laundering Act, various regulators like RBI and SEBI draw the power to make their own specific guidelines for the institutions they govern or they regulate. So, from the Prevention of Money Laundering Act, RBI derives the power to prepare guidelines for various financial institutions or payment and settlement entities, payment and settlement systems that are regulated by the RBI. So RBI has framed the Master Direction Know Your Customer, which was introduced in 2016. Similarly, deriving the powers from the same act, SEBI has prescribed Know Your Client requirements for various intermediaries of SEBI. For the purpose of this video, we'll limit our discussion to the KYC directions formulated by the RBI. Let us move forward with understanding KYC directions. Before we move forward, let us understand certain important terminology that we'll be using all throughout this video. First of all, we'll start with regulated entities. So the KYC directions are applicable to all regulated entities. Now, what do regulated entities mean? All the entities that are regulated by the RBI, which includes banks, NBFCs, payment system providers, system participants, prepaid payment issuers, card issuers, all India financial institutions, etc. Next, we'll understand what is customer due diligence. So the KYC, the process of conducting KYC, which we call it in layman terms, is actually known as customer due diligence process. Next, we'll understand what is OVD, officially valid document. So for conducting the process of KYC, you need certain documents, the proofs of identity of a person. So the KYC directions, they recognize certain documents as OVDs. These include passport, driving license, the proof of possession of your Aadhaar number. This may be the Aadhaar number itself or certain other documents like the QR code, XML code, which we'll discuss in the upcoming slides. The voter's identity card, the letter issued by National Population Register, and the job card issued by NREGA are some other documents which are considered to be valid documents or officially valid documents. And there is also a concept of equivalent e-documents, which was introduced in the previous year. So equivalent e-document would mean any electronic equivalent of the OVDs that we discussed right now. Now, to be recognized as an equivalent e-document, the document has to be issued by the issuing authority directly or has to be issued in the digital locker. So a scanned copy of my Aadhaar or passport will not be considered as an equivalent e-document. It has to be in e-mode, but issued by an authority. Let's say the e-Aadhaar provided by the UIDI is an equivalent e-document, but not a scanned photocopy of my Aadhaar. Let us move forward and understand the process flow of credit sanction. The flow always starts with receipt of an application or request from the customer. Let's say I'm a bank or an NBFC. The customer will give me or put an application of request, let's say for a loan or account opening For this discussion, let us limit it to loan. However, there is same process for deposit accounts or opening any account as well. For the sake of simplicity, I'll be saying loan only now. Let's say I receive an application for a loan. The customer, along with the application, will submit some one or two of his OVDs as well as a PAN card. Please note that when we discussed the six OVDs recognized under directions, the PAN card was not included in that. So PAN card is a separate document, and that the KYC directions require you to obtain compulsorily, while obtaining the OVDs is optional. You can obtain one or two of the OVDs rather than all of them. But obtaining a PAN card is compulsory, and that is why these two have been kept separate. So once we receive the application, PAN card, and OVDs, the first and foremost thing that we would like to check is that this person does not belong to any terrorist organization or is not a willful defaulter or is not under any negative list of the financial institutions. For this purpose, United Nations Security Council maintains a list of all people who are involved with terrorist organizations with their images, their names, etc. So it is always good to check whether the name of this person or the photograph of this person seems to be matching from the list provided by the UNSC. Thereafter, we should also check whether this person is a willful defaulter. This is more relevant in case of loan transactions. So you don't want to lend to someone who will willfully default. For this purpose, RBI has given the power to CIBIL to maintain a list of willful defaulters. Now, the list maintained by CIBIL usually carries the details of corporate defaults, the directors of the corporate defaulters. However, for the individuals, we'll come to it when we do the credit check. Let us move forward in the process. Once we are ensured that this person is not a bad person or does not belong to any terrorist organization or is not a willful defaulter, we'll verify the authenticity of the OVD submitted by the customer. So we can verify these OVDs from authentic sources. How do we verify whether an OVD is authentic or not? This we'll discuss in the upcoming few minutes. Let us move forward in the process now. Once we have verified that the OVD is authentic, we will match whether the details of the OVD match with the details provided by the customer. At this stage, we establish that the OVD belongs to that person only. Once we are satisfied about the identity of the person, we move on to credit check. We check whether this person has a good credit behavior. Now, remember when we said that for individual defaults, there is no such list maintained by any organization. So, for individuals, we usually check their credit score, their credit reports. The credit reports usually highlight the defaults of the customer. Therein, we can establish whether the customer has a track record of defaulting the payments, and then we can take the credit decision accordingly. Once we're done with the credit check, we can also do additional due diligence if the need be. Let's say the KYC of the customer does not seem to be very reliable. We can go visit a customer or do any additional check that we can do or that we intend to do. Once all of these checks are completed, the final lending or account opening decision is taken. Let us move to modes of conducting CDD. Now, when I say CDD, it is that part of the process when we verify the authenticity of the OVD as well as match it with the details provided by the customer. So those two stages are the center to KYC directions. Let us understand various modes of doing that. The first and the most recognized and the most seasoned method is the physical method, wherein a customer visits you, submits a copy of his OVD, PAN, and a photograph. Then he also shows you the original, the regulated entity, or rather the person doing the KYC on behalf of regulated entity matches the original OVD with the copy and matches the photograph with the customer present before them. Once he is satisfied, the signatures of the customer are obtained and waiting for execution of the agreement. Next method is digital KYC. Now, the name may suggest that this is a contactless mode, but it actually is an extension of physical KYC. So, rather than obtaining a physical copy of the OVD, the regulated entity captures the image of original OVD on an application. Similarly, rather than obtaining the photograph, a live photograph of the applicant is also captured. Along with this, there is live location tagging also. And the rest of the process remains same as physical KYC. Next, we move on to VCIP, or the Video Customer Identification Process. Now, this is a contactless process wherein the customer submits an equivalent e-document of the OVDs or the XML or QR code of Aadhaar. So, Aadhaar, XML, and QR are two ways of conducting offline verification of Aadhaar. Now, why are we conducting an offline verification? This I'll tell you in a few minutes. Other than that, the customer can also submit a KYC identifier. This again, I'll discuss in a minute. So these are the documents that a customer can submit along with the loan application and PAN. And the OVD submitted by the customer will be verified by the regulated entity or the RE through various means. Now, what this means can be this again, I'll be discussing in a few minutes. Once the OVDs are verified, the RE does a video call with the applicant, wherein the applicant will show their original OVDs on the video call and an image of that will be captured. Once the entire process is done, the loan agreement is also usually executed digitally. Next, we move on to OTP based eKYC. So OTP based eKYC is not a mode of conducting CDD, but more of a manner of authentication of Aadhaar. If you remember just a minute ago, I said that XML and QR are modes of conducting offline verification of Aadhaar. And now I'm saying that OTP based eKYC is a manner of authentication of Aadhaar. So we understand there are two terms. One is authentication of Aadhaar, and the another is offline verification of Aadhaar. So this distinction came after the Supreme Court verdict on Aadhaar, which barred entities other than banks or certain specified entities to obtain Aadhaar number of any customer. So under the authentication processes, the entity can obtain Aadhaar. So all the authentication processes that are there today require the entity to obtain the Aadhaar number of the customer. On the other hand, the offline verification modes do not require you to obtain the Aadhaar number. Rather, you obtain the QR code that is there in the Aadhaar or an XML file which contains very limited details of the customer. Now, OTP-based eKYC, since it is a manner of authentication of Aadhaar, we understand that not all financial institutions can do this. This is usually done by banks and certain specified entities. Now, Aadhaar can be authenticated by sending an OTP to the customer's registered mobile number. So there is a mobile number when you get your Aadhaar card made, there is a mobile number that you provide. So the RE will or the bank will obtain your Aadhaar number and send an OTP through UIDAI facility to your mobile number. Once you provide that OTP to the bank, your verification is done. Usually this is done for individual lending, but please note that this is a temporary mode and it is valid only for a year with several limitations on the account opened through this mode. We'll discuss this again in the upcoming slides. The next mode of conducting CDD is obtaining information through CKYCR. So if a customer comes to you and submits his KYC identifier, you can just use that identifier, input it on the CKYCR facility, and download all the verified OVDs of the customer from there. The details in the OVDs can be matched with the application details provided in the application by the customer, and the verification process is done. Loan documents are usually signed digitally, but there is no bar on doing it physically as well. Let us this was all about the conducting CDD of an individual. Let us see how do we conduct CDD for entities. Let us start with a sole proprietorship firm. So if a sole proprietorship firm comes with an application, the first and foremost thing that we do is to undertake the CDD of the proprietor itself, which we can do with the various modes that we just now discussed. Along with that, certain additional documents should be obtained. There is a list of documents provided here, which you can also see on the screen. If any of the two of these documents are obtained and verified, the CDD for the sole proprietorship firm is said to be complete. Similarly, in case of a partnership firm, the CDD of the beneficial owner or the manager or any employee holding power of attorney on behalf of the firm should be done. Now, what is beneficial owner here? Any person who is going to derive the ultimate benefits from the firm is the beneficial owner. The directions define the beneficial owner of a partnership to be any person who is entitled to 15% of capital or profits. That is, a partner having a 15% share in a partnership firm is considered to be the beneficial owner. Now, once the CDD of the beneficial owner or any person holding the power of attorney on behalf of the partnership firm is done, any of the following documents can be obtained and verified. This is how the CDD of a partnership firm is done. CDD of companies, trusts, and various other organizations is done on the similar lines. For a company, a beneficial owner will be any person having controlling interest. Controlling interest has been defined as any person having 25% of the shares of capital or profits. That is to say, any person having 25% of the shareholding in the company. Let us move forward and understand the intricacies of various modes of conducting the KYC or CDD. When we discuss the various modes, there were certain points that I said that we'll be discussing in a few minutes. Let us start with those points now. Starting with the physical mode, first of all, Aadhaar number, as we discussed, can only be obtained by banks. So banks can do an authentication using eKYC authentication facility provided by the UIDAI. This involves taking the biometric information of the customer and then verifying it from the facility provided by the UIDAI. REs other than banks can only obtain proof of possession of Aadhaar. Now, what will proof of possession of Aadhaar mean? This usually is the QR code or the XML file provided by the customer. In case the customer provides you with the Aadhaar card or the copy of Aadhaar card, it must be ensured that the Aadhaar number of the customer is redacted. The authentication of Aadhaar details provided by the customer can only be done through offline verification by entities other than banks. Copies of other OVDs may also be obtained. Usually, financial institutions ensure that all of these documents provided under the physical mode are self-attested by the customer. Moving on to digital KYC. As we have discussed that this is just an extension of physical KYC, but there are certain intricacies in the process. First of all, starting with the application on which the photograph is to be taken and the entire process is to be carried on. The application is to be developed by the organization. The access to this application has to be in a controlled manner. So only the REs who are allowed to undertake the KYC on behalf of the customer should have the access to the application. This access control is usually laid down by providing user IDs and passwords to specific employees. Now, once there is the access control established, the process of CDD can start. For this purpose, usually the customer either visits the RE or the RE or the employee of the RE visits the location of the customer. The customer usually carries the original OVD with himself. The RE captures a photograph of the original OVD on the application, and then the live photo of the customer is captured along with the tagging of the location where these pictures are captured and the time locking as well. So when these images are processed, they are processed with the location and the time when they were captured. Usually, digital KYC process is done by the employees of the RE itself. In case of banks, business correspondents of the banks are also allowed to do this process. Moving on to video CIP. This process is the most discussed about process in the previous month, since lots and lots of amendments were relating to this process only. This process can be used for conducting CDD of individuals, proprietors, authorized signatories, and beneficial owners of legal entities as well. So before the amendment, CDD of individuals only was allowed through this process. However, after the amendment, all other entities have also been included. However, in case of entities other than individuals, as we discussed, there are certain additional documents to be obtained. The process of verification of these documents has not been provided in the directions. So in case there is an equivalent e-document submitted by the customer, it is easy to verify it from the issuing authority. However, we notice that in many cases, those documents are not usually in the electronic format. And in that case, the verification of the documents becomes a little tricky, since we do not have an online mode to verify the document. Moving on, this method may also be used for conversion of existing OTP-based KYC accounts to full KYC accounts, and as well as periodic updation of KYC. And right now, these terms might sound confusing. So, as I said earlier, that the OTP-based KYC account has certain limitations. One of the limitations was that this account can continue for 1 year only. In case we intend to continue the account further, we'll have to conduct a full CDD using any other mode of CDD. And now, even vCIP mode can be used for this conversion. Regarding the periodic updation, we'll come back to it in a few minutes. Moving on, the application of the video CIP is specified to be only and only operated by the officials of the RE. This means that the KYC verification process cannot be outsourced. However, there is not complete limitation of outsourcing anything regarding vCIP. The technology related outsourcing can definitely be done. For this purpose, we can obtain equivalent e-documents from the customer and do a digital verification of the same. Verification can be done through various means like OTP-based authentication, offline verification of Aadhaar, or downloading the KYC records from CKYC facility. Or we can also verify the equivalent e-document from the database of the issuing authority. Here, there are two things that might come to your mind. First is that OTP-based authentication is a temporary mode. Then why do it here? If an OTP-based authentication is done as a part of vCIP, which is a broader process, it will be valid from the very first day, and it will not be a temporary KYC, but a full KYC from the very first day. The requirement of converting it to a full KYC after 1 year will not be there. And the other limitations that are there on the OTP-based eKYC accounts will also not be there. Next, we just now discussed that CKYCR in itself is a valid and full process of conducting CDD. In case I download the records of customer from CKYCR, why is there a need to do a full CIP? Uh, we can say that this is an enhanced due diligence process here. Once you have verified all the details of the customer from CKYCR, you can still do a VCIP in order to have an enhanced comfort on the identity of the customer. In each and every case, as we know, we'll have to obtain the PAN card. It is very clearly specified in the directions that the PAN has to be always and always verified from the issuing authority's database only. In case of VCIP, we also have to ensure that there is a concurrent audit in order to ensure that there is no tampering with the documents. Since this is a digital mode of KYC, there are various risks involved in that, and hence concurrent audit is required. Now, concurrent audit does not need to be a very expensive, costly audit done by an external auditor. You can establish a maker checker concept as well, wherein one person will do the KYC and other person will continue to check it on real time basis, and so as to ensure a smooth flow of the VCIP process. Details of the KYC conducted and the person conducting the KYC have to be maintained by the regulated entity at all times. Moving on, since this is a digital process, there may be various technicalities involved. Hence, the KYC direction specifies certain infrastructure requirements for the VCIP entities. First of all, the entities have to comply with the minimum baseline cyber security framework that was applicable for banks till now. And the technology infrastructure for this VCIP process should be housed in the premises of the entity itself. You cannot outsource the entire technology infrastructure to someone else. And the connection and interaction should originate from the own secured network of the entity. This means to say that you cannot conduct a VCIP over a WhatsApp call or a Skype call or any other public mode. The VCIP will have to develop its own application or a website for conducting the VCIP. Regarding the VCIP, it is very important that we obtain the customer's consent before doing this process. This consent has to be recorded on the video itself. Also, in order to ensure that the customer does not give the pre-recorded answers or something, it is always good to keep changing the sequence of questions or the questions itself that you ask on the video. It should also be ensured that there is always good connection so that the face of the customer is not blurred or the OVDs are captured properly. Also, on an ongoing basis, the VCIP process needs to be audited by uh, information security auditors. Moving on to OTP based eKYC. As we discussed, this can be done by banks only. And for this, again, the specific consent of the customer is required to be obtained. There are certain limitations on account opened through this mode. Since this is a temporary KYC, there are several restrictions. Like in case it is a deposit account, the balance cannot exceed 1 lakh. In case it is a loan account, sanction cannot exceed 60,000 in a year. Only term loans can be sanctioned for these accounts. Account is not allowed to be operated for more than 1 lakh. Or also, it is very necessary to obtain a declaration from the customer that no other account has been opened by him or her using this similar mode. And this information is required to be indicated in the CKYCR records of the customer. Now you must be wondering why indicate some information on the CKYCR records. You'll understand this in a minute. So CKYCR, or the Centralized KYC Registry, is a registry which contains all the KYC information of customers. Whenever a financial institution carries on a CDD process, it is required to upload all of these details on the CKYCR. Once these details are obtained by one financial institution, the remaining financial institutions can use the data provided by one financial institution which had carried the entire CDD process. Relying on the CDD process done by this financial institution, others can do the KYC. So, whenever a KYC process is done for the first time, the information is required to be uploaded on the CKYCR within 10 days. When the information is uploaded for the first time, a KYCR identifier, the KYC identifier for the customer is generated. This is required to be communicated to the customer by the entity. Now, you must be wondering that is this a valid mode of KYC? Yes, as we already discussed, this is recognized as a full and valid mode of conducting KYC. Let us move on to other provisions of the KYC directions. Starting with a policy. As we know, whenever there is any regulation, any direction, there needs to be a policy that guides the organization for compliance of the same. So every organization or every RE is required to have a KYC policy in place, which should be approved by the board, obviously. The policy should include the process of identification and acceptance of customer, broad contours of compliance of various regulations under the directions. There should also be guidance on secrecy and maintenance of information, the governance framework, who will include the senior management, who will be responsible for ensuring what should be clearly laid down in the policy. Also, the manner of conducting ongoing due diligence of the customers should be there. So it's KYC is not a one-time thing, We conduct the KYC of the customer once, but there may be changes in the information of the customer. There may be changes in the credit behavior of the customer. That is why it is very necessary to have an ongoing check on the customer. It may sound very weird that conducting an ongoing KYC for all the customers. No. So we can decide based on the risk or the KYC done, the RE can decide which customer needs more focus and which does not. We can do this by categorizing the customers in various risk categories. Let us come back to this in a few minutes and move on to the next major provision under the KYC directions, which is outsourcing. Outsourcing of KYC function may be done to the extent it does not outsource decision making power. What does this mean? If I outsource the process of doing KYC of a customer, the entity doing the KYC will obtain the KYC records of the customer. They will match it with the information provided by the customer. And then how does the decision making power does not get outsourced? So while outsourcing the function of KYC to an entity, we must ensure that the entity doing the KYC is very well versed with our procedures or our KYC policy. The outsourcing entity will match the records and give us the information that the information provided by the customer is matching with the OVDs. But whether this customer is KYC compliant or whether we want to take a lending decision should be in our hands only. So to put it simply, the function of collecting and processing the information can be outsourced. However, for this also, we'll have to ensure that we do not breach the information security guidelines. Now you must be wondering, what are these information security guidelines? So as we know that when we are obtaining KYC details from a customer, it is his personal details. Along with that, we also get credit details of the customer. All of these are sensitive in nature and may not be required or may not be prudent to share it with everyone else. Hence, there are certain restrictions on sharing of information of customers. We have a detailed discussion on this, and I'll Just put the link in the description box below. Moving forward, the records or information obtained by the outsourcing entity are required to be shared with the RE within 2 days so that the RE can take the lending decision. Please note that even if the KYC function is outsourced, the responsibility of RE does not cease. So the RE will always have to ensure that the outsourcing entity complies with the KYC directions as well as the policy of the RE. Moving on, the next major requirement, which was introduced the previous year only, is the money laundering and terrorist financing risk assessment. Financial institutions, as we know, are very much prone to the risk of money laundering and terrorist financing. Uh, they are required to carry out an assessment of the risk posed on them. This would include assessment of the geography they are working in, the classes of customers or the types of customers, the types of products they are offering, the end use that the customer will be putting the loan through. The outcome of this result is always required to be placed before the board or any other committee for that matter. This requirement should also form part of a policy of the RE. Um, how to carry on a risk assessment regarding this and the broad contours, the broad requirements that you must keep in mind. We have again prepared a detailed discussion on this, and I'll also provide the link to this in the description box below. Moving on to the next provisions, there are provisions relating to appointment of designated director and principal officer. So since there is a policy and there are requirements to be complied with, someone has to be responsible. The KYC policy is required to lay down the role of senior management in, in ensuring the compliance of KYC policy. However, there are two specific requirements. One is the appointment of a designated director who will be responsible to ensure sorry, overall compliance of the directions. Secondly, we also need to appoint a principal officer who will be responsible for ensuring all the reportings to be done. Both PO and DD cannot be a same person. You cannot designate the same person to be the designated director as well as the principal officer for an RE. The details of both of these officers, whenever they are appointed, are required to be communicated to the FIUIND. Now, what is FIUIND? It is the Financial Intelligence Unit of India. This unit is laid down under the PMLA guidelines, or the Prevention of Money Laundering Act has laid down this unit, which is responsible for processing all the information regarding various frauds taking place, the money laundering acts, and compliance of the PMLA and other related regulations. Moving on to the process of customer acceptance. We have discussed that CDD is required to be done for all customers. But the CDD has to be at the customer level. And this, in the terms of KYC directions, is known as unique customer identification code level. So let's say you have undertook KYC of a customer at once. Now you designate a UCIC to that customer, or to lay it in simple terms, a code, an identification code to that customer. Next time, if the same customer comes to you for another loan or another proposal, and you will have to ensure that once the KYC has been done, until and unless there are changes in the information of the customer, the KYC is not required to be done again. This is the concept of doing CDD at UCIC level. In case there are joint account holders, CDD will have to be done for all of them. And as we have discussed, that the name of customer should not appear in the list of UNSC or RBI, and PAN is required to be verified from the verification facility only. And in case e-documents are submitted, digital signature will have to be verified as per the provisions of Information Technology Act. Moving on, there is a requirement of risk management under KYC. If you remember, we discussed about ongoing due diligence and periodic updation a few minutes back. Now, the ongoing due diligence and periodic updation, as I said, is not required to be done for each and every customer. We can decide for which customer it is more necessary and for which it is not. How do we do that? We categorize our customers in categories, which is high, medium, and low risk categories. We can also have more granular risk categorization in this. Now, how do we decide if a customer is a high risk customer or a low risk customer? This we can set out various parameters for this, like the customer's identity, social and financial status, nature of the business, location, the use of the facility, etc. We can also rely on the previous credit behavior of the customer and the quality of KYC. Let's say the undertaking of the KYC was very easy, there was no mismatch in the information. You can call it a low risk customer provided the other parameters are also satisfied. Similarly, in case we find certain differences or mismatches in the information, that customer may be put upon the higher pedestals of the risk. Moving on, periodic updation. As we have just now discussed, this is a risk-based approach. So a customer with higher risk will require periodic updation at shorter intervals compared to the customer on lower risk pedestals. The directions provide that a periodic updation of the details of a high risk customer is required to be done every 2 years, 8 years for the medium risk, and 10 years for the low risk customers. In case there is no change in the KYC information during this time, we may obtain a self-declaration from the customer regarding the same. Now, this may sound more relevant for the low risk and medium risk customers. For high risk, we can still undertake the entire CDD process again. In case there is change in address of the customer, if the customer is an individual, we can just obtain a self declaration of the new address and we can verify it within the next 2 months. In case of other than individuals, it is good to always conduct the entire CDD process again. In case there is any change other than the address, let's say there is change of the name itself, which usually is case when women get married and change their surnames in India. In that case, entire CDD process has to be done again. Moving on to the requirement of record management. All the record of transactions are required to be maintained for a period of 5 years after the transaction is done. The records of identity of the customer are also required to be preserved for a period of at least 5 years after the relationship has ended with the customer. Let's say we gave a term loan to the customer, the term was 3 years. So we'll have to maintain the records of the identity for an entire period of 8 years. Moving on, secrecy obligations. As we discussed that KYC information is very personal and sensitive, it should not be divulged to any other person, and hence REs are always required to maintain the secrecy of information. Until and unless there is a compulsion of law or required by any regulator or courts, this information should not be disclosed to anyone else. Now, this might sound like an obstruction to the business of the entity, since in many cases we are required to share the information with someone else. Let's say for outsourcing, we'll have to share the name and other details of the customer with the entity to process the information for KYC. For these things, to ensure that there is no obstruction in our dealings, usually what REs do is obtain a declaration from the customer or a consent from the customer for sharing this information. For obtaining this consent, it must always be ensured that this consent is an informed consent. So the ask for the consent should not be hidden away in a heap of words, but should be very clear, and the customer should be made aware that he has the option to agree or not to agree to share his information. Moving forward, we'll discuss certain major provisions of the Prevention of Money Laundering Act and rules. Why are we discussing this here? Because as we know that the genesis of the KYC comes from Prevention of Money Laundering Act only. While this act is in itself a very broad topic and may require a separate discussion, there are certain provisions that are linked with the KYC directions that we'll be discussing here. So the major provisions are relating to maintenance of records and reporting of the same. Uh, the REs are required to maintain records of all the transactions that they do with the customers, but specifically all the cash transaction of rupees 10 lakhs or more. Now, this may not be just a transaction of rupees 10 lakhs in one go, but various transactions that add up to this amount should also be maintained. All the cash transactions where forged or counterfeit notes were used should be maintained. Similarly, all the cross-border wire transfers, transactions of purchase or sale of immovable property or suspicious transactions should be maintained. There are also reporting requirements with respect to these specific transactions. In case there is any suspicious transaction, now from suspicious I would mean that any transaction which is not of a general nature, any transaction which does not seem to be prudent, may classify as suspicious transaction. Entities may lay down their own parameters to determine what is suspicious for them. All these transactions are required to be reported to the FIU within 7 working days of the transaction coming into the notice. Any purchase or sale of immovable property of rupees 50 lakhs or above is required to be reported to the FIU within by the 15th of the succeeding quarter. So let's say we have 10 transactions of purchase or sale of immovable property in this quarter. We'll have to report them all together by the 15th of next quarter. All the other specified transactions are required to be reported by the 15th of next month. So whenever we have any of these transactions during a month, these are required to be reported by the 15th of next month. This was all for the KYC directions for you. I hope you all like this video. In case you want more such videos, please let us know. And to be notified about our other knowledge resources, please subscribe to our channel. In case you want to be notified about our other knowledge resources like our articles and presentations, please subscribe to our mailing list. For subscribing to our mailing list, you can drop a mail to finserv@vinodkothari.com. I'll provide the email ID in the description box below. Please let us know if you like this video. Thank you.